Thank you, Debbie. Welcome to Conversations with Brand New. Appreciate you doing this. Um,
Absolutely.
you've been named as one of the most creative people in business by Fast Company and one of the most influential designers of the current era by Graphic Design USA. I reckon the mantle is sitting pretty comfortably on you.
Oh, I don't know. I don't really think a lot about the mantles. You have to either feel it inside, or no matter how many mantles you get, they can't really persuade you of something that you don't feel internally.
No, but I think I'm sure it is you earned it. It does not just come out of the blue. It's not just been plucked out of hot air, isn't it?
I hope so. I hope so.
Yes. So, did you trespass into design, or was it a by design choice?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I said, did you trespass into design, or was it a by design choice?
No, it was just a accidental decision. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a design discipline when I was in college. I ultimately discovered when I was working on the school newspaper that I was as interested in the design as in the editing, because the newspaper editors were required to put the newspaper together themselves, very old school layout and paste up. And so that's what I ended up learning on the job how to do. And ultimately, because I had a degree in English literature and a minor in Russian literature and English translation, the only marketable skill I had when I graduated was making old school layout and paste up. And so that was my first job.
Fonts and typesetting and all of that.
And wax machines and stamp machines and ruby lith and X-Acto blades. Yeah, those were all the tools of my early trade.
Color plates and positives, and I mean,
Yes,
absolutely.
I had mad skills with a stat camera.
Excellent, excellent. So now that you've spent so much of time in this space, what do you think aids design and what do you think ails design?
Well, I think design is only as good as the people or person making it. I think what helps design is thinking, really sound strategic thinking, um, being very aware of the motivation for doing something. Is it internally driven to satisfy some internal need of an organization, or is it externally driven where it's providing a new way of thinking about or understanding the organization? Those are, I think, really, really important things to consider. And then the big why are you doing this in the first place? Do you have a really strong answer for that? Is it ego, or is it marketplace position? Is it a desire to see your own imprint, or is it something that is going to make a difference for your audience?
Do you see in the current zeitgeist, there is an overemphasis on STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, math, and it's probably coming at the cost of culture, anthropology, history, arts, etc. Do you think that is coming in the way of better design and better designers?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do I think that there's more of an emphasis on STEM than, say, STEAM?
Yeah, STEM. Yeah.
Um,
Then STEAM. Yeah, probably. The A will bring in the arts aspect of it. Yes, yes. Yeah, that's what the question now. Yeah.
um, I mean, yes and no. In the United States, not so much. I think that we're still seeing a strong pull towards the arts, certainly by the people that want to make art, and I'm talking about all arts in that category, not just fine art. Um, Around the world, I'm not so sure. Especially now with COVID, where I haven't been able to travel as much. I was very fortunate pre-COVID. I was in South Africa, I was in Pakistan, I was in China, I was in Japan, I was in Latin America. I really was able to see firsthand how people were making design, what the the visual language of each culture was becoming, and now not as much. And so I really feel quite sad about the fact that I'm not seeing sort of what the on the ground response is to the way in which we're living right now.
Yeah, perfectly understandable. Absolutely. Do you think design and design thinking, do the twain meet?
If you're using design thinking, it should be in the service of design.
Mm-hmm.
If not, there's no point in doing it. Then it's just thinking, in which case that needs to be put towards design as well.
Right.
But I also have some issues with the whole notion of design thinking, and is it just a sort of fancier word for words for strategic thinking? I don't know. I mean, when you're playing basketball, are you also, as you're playing, thinking about basketball thinking? It's so there's a part of me that feels that us designers overcomplicate the process of design. I do think that before any design work, there needs to be sound strategic thinking about what you're going to do, the result of which is embedded in a creative brief. I think one or 2 days of working on a creative brief could save months of creative time, and that pardon me, everybody is literally and figuratively on the same page in the creation of that design based on criteria that everybody agrees on. What is the criteria for success? Here it is. When you show the work, does it deliver on that success? Yes, it does. Next.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so as it is said, we're only as good as a brief we get.
Yes, well, or the brief we make.
Or the brief you make, absolutely. So if you're on the client side and we are the communication, the creative, the agency side, it's always said, we could only be as good as the brief you provide us, or help us kind of create the brief, give it to you, relay it back to us.
It should be something that's made collaboratively. And frankly, I believe that the design team should take a lead on creating a creative brief, because they're the ones that are delivering. They should be given or are part of the making of all of the strategic input embedded in the creative brief. One would argue that if they're not, then they're probably not as involved as they should be, in my opinion. And then they are responsible for the creation of that brief and the deliverable against the brief.
Right. Yeah. You've done podcasts, you've done books, and the podcast Design Matters. What came first, the podcast or the book? And what triggered you? What inspired you to actually do either?
Well, the podcast I started working on the idea for it in November of 2004. I was contacted by a fledgling internet radio network called Voice America. And I thought they were offering me a job.
At that time, yeah.
Yeah, I was very excited. I thought they were offering me a paid job, like a gig. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. I can do something new and interesting and get paid for it. But that wasn't really the case. They were offering me an opportunity to actually pay them to produce a radio show for me. So it was the ultimate vanity project. But at the time, they caught me at an interesting moment in my career where I was really beginning to feel that I was losing my creative spirit, that everything I was doing at that time was very commercially driven, and it really impacted by a return on an investment and shareholder value and shelf presence and marketplace position. So I really decided at that moment in time that, why not take this little opportunity to invest in myself, invest in a project that could have little or no commercial impact, but it would be fun and exciting. And I test some new parts of my brain that I hadn't been using in quite a while. And so I signed on for 13 episodes, and suddenly the show was really well received, despite this sort of horror in the way it sounded. It was terrible. It was created on two landlines at the time. But this was back in 2004. The iPhone hadn't even been introduced yet.
Yeah.
And so I did that I worked with Voice America for 100 episodes. Wow. Finished with them in 2009, and then moved to Design Observer And then 2 years ago, moved to the TED Audio Collective. So it's been a really interesting run in developing and evolving the show. So that started in 2004. The show was launched in 2005. I published my first book in 2007, and that was at the recommendation of Stephen Heller. And he had been invited to work on a book project with a publisher that already had a book in mind and a title in mind, and that was How to Think Like a Great Graphic Designer. And Steve passed on it, but he recommended that they call me, and they did. And I was somewhat mortified by the idea of the title, as if there was any one way that all great graphic designers need to think, and recommended, instead of creating a sort of menu for how great graphic designers are supposed to think, why not? At that point, I'd already been doing the podcast for about a year. I suggested interviewing great designers, revealing how they individually think. And they went for it. And that became sort of an extension of the show, certainly inspired by the show format. And I interviewed, I believe it was about 20 of the world's greatest graphic designers working at that time. And that became the book. The shows continued to evolve. I've continued to write books, and I am on the eve of launching my 7th book, which is called Why Design Matters: Conversations with the World's Most Creative People. And that's a kind of a monograph of the show, 17 years in. It's a compendium of some of my best interviews, best quotes from people that I've spoken to. And it's a coffee table book featuring really beautiful photography. It's been a long time labor of love.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you want to unravel the book a little more, maybe a little more partially?
Sure. Well, I was approached by HarperCollins to create a book about the show. It is 10 by 10 inches, so it's really big, and it's 363 pages, so it's really thick, weighs about 5 pounds. And I had to go through all of my archives, all of my transcripts. I had all of the shows that I thought I might want to include transcribed. I couldn't include all of the interview because each interview was about 10,000 words, and I was only seeking to do a book that was between 70 and 100,000 words. Turned out it's 150,000 words, so it's bigger than originally anticipated. And so it's the interviews that I could include needed to have sort of an extractable excerpt that I could include on its own, that wasn't dependent on the entire interview. Otherwise, I could have only included, 7 interviews or 10 interviews, and this is 60. And then I have about another 60 or so full page quotes that people have said during the shows that I thought were super inspiring and motivating in some way. And then again, full page, beautiful portrait photography taken by some of the best photographers in the world. And then essays. I have an essay by the great Tim Ferriss, Maria Popova, Steve Heller, Zach Pettit.
Maria Popova from the Marginalian?
Yes. She wrote a gorgeous essay for me.
Lovely. So don't worry about the people who you got left out because you can always have them in the sequel.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. You wear multiple hats, Debbie. Author, podcaster, curator, educator. What is the one role that excites you most?
That's a tough question. Suresh, that's impossible to answer. I'm gonna fight back to that question a little bit and say just living, having the opportunity to do any of those things at any given time.
No, it's like asking a mother, you have 3 kids, whom do you love the most?
Right. I mean, I love everything I'm doing in the moment I'm doing it, teaching when I'm teaching, podcasting when I'm podcasting, writing when I'm writing. And
you're totally immersed in it.
Yeah. And I worked a really, really long time to be able to do these different things. There's something really wonderful about having a varied practice where you do get to do a lot of different things. On the other side, on the flip side to that, it takes that much longer to be able to achieve mastery in any of them because you're always doing different things. And so therefore that 10,000 hours is multiplied by how many various things you're doing. Fortunately, I'm at a point now in my life where I'm 60 years old. So I'd like to think that I've achieved somewhat near mastery in a few things just because I've been doing it for so long.
So the trade-off is worth it, isn't it?
I think so. You just have a lot more patience.
Absolutely.
A lot of people think they have to achieve something by the time they're 30. If that had been my life, I would have been a massive failure.
Right, absolutely. 500 podcasts is a phenomenal accomplishment, isn't it? And I would like to understand, Debbie, what is the kind of creative energy? Where do you source it from? I know a lot of it is intrinsic. It's got to be intrinsic, but how do you use that to deliver so much consistency and velocity?
Well, there is an assumption in there that I'm doing that. So thank you. I think I'm very much a perfectionist. I see flaws really, really clearly. And I'm always just trying to do the best possible job I can. But it does come from a certain, I think, OCD compulsion for things to be as perfect as I can make them, which can sometimes be exhausting.
Especially maybe for people on the other side of the fence. And probably for the individual as well. You're right. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. So we are in an increasingly commoditized world, right? There is not much of differentiation. It is an SOS, as we call it, sea of sameness. What do you recommend brands to be doing to be remaining distinct, relevant, and having that pull for customers to come back to you? What would be your take? What would be your recommendation?
Well, I think every brand straddles a continuum. And when you're doing something new, you're straddling a continuum between something that is very recognizable to very, very surprising. And if it's too close to the recognizable, people aren't that excited. If it's too close to the exciting and thrilling part, people might not recognize it. And then you get into that whole Tropicana nightmare where something is new and different and people don't understand it. So you're always straddling that continuum. How can you make something that people intrinsically understand, but also is exciting to them? You also want to be asking, why? Why do I need to do this? Am I doing it for internally driven reasons? Am I doing it for the sake of making something new? Or am I doing something different to create a difference in someone's life? And so the big answer to the question why is something you always must be keeping in mind, and that becomes your North Star. I'm doing this for this reason, and this is what the criteria for success is in that reasoning. So those are, I think, two of the biggest questions you have to be aware of: the how close and how far.
Right, actually, beautifully articulated. Thanks, Debbie. In fact, I'm just tempted to, with your permission, extract from Alan Gannett's book, The Creative Curve. Okay, where he talks about exactly what you just mentioned. When you layer a little bit of novelty to something that is familiar, the acceptance is far greater. Yes. Rather than kind of, like you mentioned, so near yet so far, or so far yet so near. It's like, and then he quotes beautiful examples of the Haagen-Dazs flavor when they wanted to do lavender flavor. They first brought it along with vanilla, so that because vanilla was always it's familiar, it's easy, palate has already been tested and tasted. And then they kind of layered the lavender part of it so that it gained acceptance. And then subsequently they went solo with the lavender flavor, and he quotes very good examples. Yeah, exactly what you just shared. Just to move on, trust deficit is, a malaise that is affecting a lot of businesses. And do you see designing for trust playing an important role to address some of the ills?
I don't know that you can design for trust. It feels to me like if you're designing for trust, there is an expectation that somebody's going to trust you as a result of that design. I think you have to start with trust. I think you have to be introduced with trust. If somebody doesn't trust you, You can't design to trust. It's like designing to authenticity. Then it's not, then it's not authentic. Then you're
Right.
designing towards something. So I think you have to have values in an organization that are trusted. And then you can build on top of that. The primary reason somebody is not going to buy something from you is because they don't trust you. So you can't design to trust. You can only design with trust.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I think, this is, what I was tempted to kind of actually borrow from this phrase by Brian Chesky, founder of Airbnb. And because, who thought some years back that we'd be actually going into strangers' homes, let alone sleep on strangers' beds?
I'm sorry, say that again. I lost you.
Some years back, till about some years back, who ever thought that we would be actually willingly going into strangers' homes, let alone sleep on strangers' beds? But
Oh, yes, yes.
right,
Okay,
so
get it now. Yeah.
the Airbnb model was actually kind of conditioned on making sure that whatever I do, it has to be done with trust, for trust, by trust.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's sort of shocking to me and kind of wonderful at the same time that this is working. That means that there is a sense of trust. There is an ability that people have to accept the notion that being in somebody else's space or being in somebody else's world could be safe. And that's an amazing, amazing thing.
Absolutely.
Especially given some of the issues that some of the ride service, rideshare brands have had. Uber's had lots of safety issues. It's kind of amazing that there isn't more with Airbnb, and that I think is a testament to our future. I also I used to say the same thing about eBay. eBay could have been a disaster, but the embedded feedback that it provides, the idea that somebody can and will give somebody a rating, really goes a long way in keeping people sort of on the straight and narrow. That's an amazing thing. eBay
Absolutely.
could have been the biggest scam ever.
Right. Maybe as trustworthy or untrustworthy as the pawn shop around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with all this multiple podcasts and books, I'm sure there has been some significant takeaway in terms of inspiration and some people or experiences that left a lasting legacy. Would you want to share some of those experiences, Debbie?
Well, I think one of the most significant, and I've talked about this before, this is a question that people love to ask, is with David Lee Roth, the former frontman of Van Halen. And when I had him on the show, of course, I was alive when 1984 came out, one of the biggest albums of the time. Back in 1984, Van Halen had the biggest album, the biggest tour, the biggest video, the biggest singles. And they were on the top of the world. They were on the top of the world. And I was interviewing David Lee Roth a couple of years ago. He had launched a tattoo ink brand. And I asked him, I couldn't help but ask, back in 1984, what did that feel like? What did it feel like to be the most popular dude on the planet? And he paused and he was uncharacteristically serious because he's a real jester. And he said, you have to be really careful when you get to the top of the tallest mountain in existence. Because when you get there, it's always cold.
And it's lonely at the top.
You're almost always alone. And there's only one direction to go. And it really made me think about the pace in which we all rush to our success. Again, as I mentioned, back when I was 30, the only thing I wanted was to be a 30 under 30. I wasn't even close. I wasn't even I couldn't even have been the 30 million under 30. And so, what are we rushing for? One would think that you'd like to have a career that lasts a lifetime. Somebody like Milton Glaser did, Massimo Vignelli. the great Paula Scher is still making some of the greatest work of her life. And so she hasn't peaked yet. And it made me think that, I'd really prefer not to peak until the day before I die. I'd like to keep doing better and better work as much as I can for the rest of my life.
More
So
power to
that's
you.
probably one of the most powerful things that I learned from David Lee Roth, of all people.
Lovely, lovely. Very inspiring, very inspiring. You co-founded the first graduate program in branding at the School of Visual Arts in New York.
Yes, yes. And I do have to say, because we are talking about this, my smartest students by far have been Indian women.
Is it?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Oh,
Indian women are brilliant.
Okay, I want to ask you, just and probably it dovetails well. Do you want to kind of look at expanding that? Have you thought about expanding that? And because I feel that, like you mentioned, India could be a great market for something that you're offering, and similarly, the Middle East, Dubai, UAE in particular as well. So maybe there is a potential for a separate conversation.
Very possibly. I mean, we tend to give priority to Indian people that apply because they're so smart. We also have a remarkable contingent of foreign students overall. We very intentionally have an extremely diverse student body. And so we always have 3, 4, 5 students from India, from the Middle East, Dubai, Jordan, Egypt. We have a good contingent of students from Brazil, from Latin America. We find those students from these countries to be exceptional and really encourage them to apply to the program because of how much they impact how we teach.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think some of the reasons could be, the intrinsic diversity, especially if you look at a country like India. Every state is a different country, different attire, different culture, different customs, different food. So the adaptability quotient of all these people are very, very high. Because
I've been to India 4 times. That's how much how important it is to what I do.
Right, absolutely. And similarly, this place is like you have almost 150 nationalities in this small country like Dubai in the UAE. So it's like a melting pot, probably far more of a melting pot than the Big Apple. So I think when it comes to creativity, branding, visual communication and stuff like that, I think the more diverse your exposure, the more heterogeneous your exposure, the better it is, I presume.
I think so. Absolutely. I think that diversity in ethnicity, in gender, in race, all of these things contribute to our understanding of the world. And the world is by no means American-centric anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that my foreign students, so to speak, my international students, teach the American students as much as the faculty does.
In fact, again, as a small extension of this conversation, we were picking up a conversation with VCU Brand Center, the Virginia Commonwealth University, but they have a lot of restrictions in terms of looking at expanding beyond their shores, because I think it's a state-run university. But I think probably in your case, you might have greater flexibility and agility in terms of migrating and looking at new markets, I guess. But as I mentioned,
Absolutely.
It could be a different topic, different conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great conversation to have. It's a very important conversation to have.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. And before I leave you, Debbie, my last question to you would be, creativity is future-proof. Agree, disagree?
It's not a one-word answer.
Okay.
I think we're all born creative, various degrees. There's not a child I've ever met that doesn't enjoy drawing or building or making things with boxes or Legos or tape, paint. There's no question that creativity seems to be intrinsic to our humanity. In terms of future-proofing that, how many do we know? How many people do we know that by third grade or so, stop drawing, stop making, stop creating. And we as a species tend to compete and judge, compare. We see this on Instagram all the time now. That performative nature of appearing perfect. The only way we're going to be able to future-proof a more generalized creativity is to encourage it and allow people to feel okay with whatever they make. In the process of making is what is the most creative. You know, I've realized over the years that I am happiest when I'm making things. It could be a podcast, it could be a lesson plan, it could be a logo, it could be any number, a book, a meal. Anything that I'm making, I'm creating from nothing with my hands, gives me great joy. And if that can be rewarded, if that could be encouraged, just the sheer joy of making something and not judging the result, then we can future-proof creativity, absolutely. But the more we have to quantify creativity with some deliverable, then we run the risk of it being more commercialized and commodified than enjoyed. So I'm sorry, it's a longer answer than, yes or
No,
no.
absolutely. I love that. I want that.
But I think it's important to say those things.
Absolutely. So two of the most or the strongest pillars that probably I could deduce from your response is that one is the psychological safety. Being able to being able to stand naked in your own truth on the one side and have that childlike, as they call in Buddhism, the beginner's mindset.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, wherein, we are able to, so there is no judgment, no expectation. You're just in that zone, as they call it, very freewheeling, free thinking. And that is when the best output comes out, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And as you mentioned, all of us are born creative. We lose it because we come in our own way, probably, or the society comes in our way, whatever that could be, But I think.
Yeah. I mean, ask yourself, am I making something for the sheer joy of making it? Or am I making something for the approval and the likes of others? And if you can start first with making something for yourself that gives you joy, that isn't dependent on likes and follows and shares,
Vanilla
then
metrics.
You're at least coming to, you're coming to it from a place of making and not a place of performing.
Or proving.
Or proving. Yeah, great. That's great.
Yesterday I was talking to Amar Casey. He's written this beautiful book called Ambitious. Humble leadership can be married to ambition. You don't need to be ruthless and type A plus exponential, whatever it is. And, and he put together a sentence which actually is etched in my mind now. He says, rather than proving yourself, maybe we can look at improving oneself. Just two letters, as a prefix to proving, and it changes the entire context, isn't it?
Yes, I'm writing that down. It's so good. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So,
and the name of what is the name of his book?
His book is, I'll send you a link, I'll send you a mail with the name of the book and the name of the author, and maybe you all can connect as well, I think.
Thank you.
You all should connect, I'm planning to kind of put together a community of thought leaders. So I'll invite you as well, So we do a lot of conversations, last week I was with Natalie. She's written this beautiful book as Business Unusual. Then Vanessa Bonds was a week before. She's again written a wonderful book called You Have More Influence Than You Think.
Oh, that's good. I love these. Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to.
Yeah, so I'll probably kind of maybe connect and see, because pick up the conversation, keep it stimulated. So I think point of view could also be, the acronym POV could also stand for point of vulnerability. The power of vulnerability, because you open up, you're authentic, you stimulate a better conversation, and rather than proving, you improve, I think, so wonderful, Debbie. It was beautiful to converse with you. We'll keep the engagement and the conversation going. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much. And I'll be in touch very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharish.